Hello everybody, it's Stephen and Walter here for another episode of So Chatty, episode 15. And today we thought we would talk about hacks and other unexpected tools for your sewing room. Things that you don't really, when you first get into sewing, even consider. But as time goes by, you get more experience, you do different things, you start to find things that solve any little problems you might be having, whether it be storage problems or additions to your sewing machine or whatever. So we made a preliminary list of these and it kept getting bigger and bigger. We're up to about 29 or 30 things right now. So depending on how time goes with this today, this may become a two-part video. So let's just get started. And these aren't in any particular order, and many of these things come from the dollar store or from other unexpected sources. And maybe a lot of these things you might have laying around your house. And I'm sure you've got lots of things that you probably use too, which if you do, and we don't cover it, why not share it with everybody else in the comments section below. So I'm going to start off with this. This is just a little piece of it. Actually, this is the reason why we're doing this video today, because I got this idea yesterday. This is shelf liner. You know, that rubberized type that you can buy in a roll of about 2 feet or 18 inches at any dollar store. And this stuff is really handy for a lot of things. Now, a lot of people might know that this is really good to put on the bottom of your foot pedal for your sewing machine if your pedal slides out from under you. So for example, if your pedal is sitting on carpet, the little rubber feet that are probably on the bottom of your pedal probably don't hold it down. And as you're working with it, you're sliding it all over the place.
That used to happen to me until I put that underneath it.
So what did you do? How'd you do that? What'd you do?
I just put a little piece of it underneath the foot pedal, and it keeps it from sliding around.
So you just set it on top of it?
On top of the carpeting.
You didn't bother to glue it to the pedal or anything?
No, I didn't bother.
No. See, I don't have to worry about this because the way mine is situated, my pedal's kind of wedged up against sort of a corner so it doesn't move. So I don't need this. And there are two sides to this, at least the kind that I have. There's one side that's a little smoother than the other. I think you would probably want to put the rougher side down against your carpet. I don't know, maybe it won't make any difference.
Actually, I didn't realize there were two sides. I just put it down.
Okay, so it probably doesn't make any difference with that.
And actually, I had a piece that was a little bit too big, and I folded it in half and put it down.
But the other thing that this stuff is really good for, if you have anything like sitting on your sewing machines on the table, if you have an extended table, and those tend to be very smooth plastic or an acrylic. Well, for example, let me just reach over here to my sewing machine and try to get this off. I have this little thing right here, and it's just plastic on the bottom, and it doesn't really give me a real problem, but it could. But if I put a little of this underneath it, it'll keep it from sliding all over the place because plastic on plastic is slippery. But here's what I discovered yesterday. So my sewing machine, when I'm sitting at it, let's say I'm sitting in front of my sewing machine right now, I have an extended table, but then there's a drop off because I don't have any more table after that. It's the way it's situated. So when I'm sewing like borders on this little quilt that I'm making here, the fabric is very slippery. So what I do is I get out a folding table, and we'll talk about folding tables and another thing I use with folding tables as well as part of the hacks. And I have this table sitting right here off to the side at the same height as my extended table. So in a sense, it gives me more of an extension. So it picks up the weight of the quilt. At least that's my theory. However, depending on the fabric, it'll slide all over the place. And so I'm constantly doing this. I'm tugging at it to get it to line up and not, suddenly slide this way when I'm trying to do a straight line. So I thought the other day, what can I do to stop that? Well, yeah, you could put a weight on it, I suppose, but then you got to keep moving the weight. So I took some of this stuff. Now I have a bigger piece, a piece that doesn't completely cover the whole little table, but it's enough to cover 3/4 of it. I put it down the middle of the table. I clamp it with a couple of binder clips underneath, so it's not a permanent attachment. My fabric doesn't slide anymore. it stays right where I want it, and easy for me to move the fabric when I want to move it, but it doesn't slide off the surface of the table, which is, very slick. And that's what got me thinking about doing this video today, because that's a simple hack. I think this is stuff for what it costs. You can buy it at any dollar store. It comes in handy for all kinds of things. Do you use it for anything else?
No, not really. Not for me, anyway. So.
Well, I used to put this under one of my smaller sewing machines as well to keep it from sliding, because it was on a slidey surface way back when I first got into sewing, and I put some of this underneath it. Well, and it kept my sewing machine from,
You also put it underneath cushions on your kitchen to stick.
Yes, you can put it under cushions on your chairs as well, like if you have wooden chairs like we do in our kitchen, and it'll stop your cushion from sliding off, okay? Actually, as an aside, someone told me to use that grippy spray, which I have some of that you usually put on the back of rulers, to keep them from sliding when you're cutting your fabric. They thought that might work as well, and it's water soluble. So I haven't tried that yet. Haven't got around to it. But this stuff is really good. It does, there's a lot of uses for this all over your house.
More than just shelf liner.
Just more than shelf liner. In fact, I don't know if a lot of people even use this as shelf liner, to be frank about it. I think they buy this stuff, and you can get it by the roll for $1, $2. I mean, yeah. So I think that's something that's a must-have in your sewing room for sure. Okay, so you give us one. We don't have to do them in this order.
I don't know. Well, I just my universal spool stand.
Well, talk about your universal.
Well, actually, I've got a Janome 550E embroidery machine, and when I bought it, one thing I've never really liked is the horizontal spools that are on it. Mm-hmm. So I purchased an optional vertical thread holder. And
so you mean a thread stand?
A thread stand.
Yeah.
Right? But the problem is a lot of my spools are 5,000 meter spools, and they're really big. They're a really big spool as opposed to the smaller regular spools. And the thread stand doesn't really work for it. So what I actually did...
Well, wait. Before you go on and say what you did, why doesn't it...
Well, what happens is when the thread comes off the 5,000 meter spools, what happens is that it actually loosens the thread, and the thread drops down onto around the base of the thread holder, or the spool, right? And because the platform isn't big enough, it can snag around the bottom of the spool and cause it to pull. So to keep that from happening, I put a piece of cardboard that I cut around. You can put it a square piece or a round piece, so long as it's bigger than the bottom of the spool. And then the thread drops down onto the piece of cardboard, and I don't have any problems with snags.
And it does work because...
it does work.
Because I do the same thing. Actually, it was his idea, and it does work, and it works really, really well. Just a piece of cardboard. So, is it
a piece like the side of a cereal box, the really thin cardboard that...
So like a Bristol board or...
Yeah, it's sturdy, but it's not so thick as like the corrugated cardboard or whatever.
Yeah, see,
I think corrugated cardboard would work.
Would probably work. It doesn't matter.
Could be a piece of plastic, could be a stiff piece of plastic, could be anything, so long as it's bigger than the bottom of your spool.
Yes.
A little bit bigger than
so you're trying to give more surface area for the spool to sit on than what usually a thread stand has.
But you do need a vertical stand to do that.
Yeah. And a lot of sewing machines don't come with vertical stands. They have maybe one spindle, and it may be a horizontal spindle, or there may be a little, many of the Janomes come with an extra spot where you can put in a vertical spindle, just one. But those don't fit that well in the hole, I have found. They don't stay in. If they get any kind of tension on them, they'll pop out. So another thing you might be interested in getting as an accessory, it's really not a hack, is to buy yourself a thread stand. But I would recommend you buy a thread stand that you can actually screw into the back of your sewing machine, not one that stands alone, because that uses up more real estate in your sewing area. And I have found I haven't had any luck with those. They tip over. If suddenly your thread, if your thread moves underneath the spool, for example, it'll topple over the thread stand, and then you've got a problem. So my recommendation would be to buy one that's for your brand of sewing machine so that the holes will line up properly, and attach it to it. Yes, this is not really a hack. This is an accessory, and it is going to cost you some money. Like the Janome ones cost around $50 for a 5 one. I think is a little bit more than that. But anyways, I recommend you get one if your machine doesn't have that already with it. Okay, that's kind of off our topic.
Yeah.
All right, so a moment ago I was talking about the shelf liner, but I was also talking about folding tables. You can't have too many folding tables in a variety of sizes, I have found. I use really large folding tables when I want to set up my area for actually quilting. Because I don't have space in my sewing room to spread my quilt out, I go into another part of the basement, the rec room, and I have four very large folding tables I bought at Costco. And when I put them all together and take my sewing machine and put it on top of that, I have a whole big area out in front of my sewing machine and off to one side of it for laying my quilt out and keeping the weight up off the machine, which is a problem when you're doing free motion quilting, or any kind of quilting for that matter. So they're good for that. But I bought some little ones too. And as I said, I put one beside my sewing machine with the shelf liner on it. But and that's to basically extend the reach of my extended table that I already have. Now you might not need that if you already have a proper sewing table where your sewing machine fits right down inside of it and gives you all that area. But a lot of people are, when they go to sew, are taking their sewing machine up out of their closet and just setting it on a table. So this helps. But the one thing I have found is my sewing machine is higher than the little table. So how do you raise the height of the table? Well, I'll show you. What you can buy, all wired up here. What you can buy from Amazon or in home decor stores are these. They usually come in a set of 2 or 4. They are bed risers. So these are used to put under the feet of your bed to raise it up a little bit for whatever reason. But these will work with these little tables or the big tables. It doesn't matter what size the table is. You get 4 of them, 1 for each leg. And these, the ones I bought, are exactly the right height for raising the little table up so it is flush with my extended table on my sewing machine. And so that gives me another foot, 18 inches of space. 18, maybe 24 inches of extension on the table. Now these do come in different sizes. I think this is a 8-inch. I think you can get them a little shorter, and I think you might actually be able to get them a little taller as well. So you need to measure first how high up you want to put the table. But these are great. And they're not expensive. I think you get 4 of them on Amazon for under $20. In fact, I think it was maybe like $14 or something like that at the time. So those are bed risers. So that's another thing that I have found in combination with the folding table that work really well. You have another one. You were mentioning to me about, well, how do you use plastic bags?
Well, okay. When I'm doing a project like a shirt or a coat or something like that, there's usually multiple pieces to it. So I need to have them in a spot where they're all in one place and easy to find. So what I usually do is I just get a big, huge plastic bag. It sounds a little sloppy, but a big, huge plastic bag, and I throw all my pieces into that bag because then I've got them all in one spot. When I'm doing a class or something like that and they say, get piece number 9 out, I can go to that bag and find piece number 9 because I know all the pieces are in that one spot. What else I do is I'll take a smaller bag sometimes because some of the pieces are really tiny for sewing patterns. So I'll put the tiny pieces into a separate bag and put it within that bag so that all the tiny pieces are together. So they're easy to find because I find that when I'm in the classes, people say, oh, well, I'll get piece number 4 and it's this little tiny little piece. And people are hunting around, looking for it and can't seem to find the piece because wherever they've stored it, they can't find it. So that's what I do. And the reason I use a plastic bag rather than like a project box or something like that is that with clothing, your pieces tend to be really big. So some of the pieces tend to be really big. So I just put it in the plastic bag, fold it up or something like that, because it'll hold all my pieces no matter what size they are. So that's what I use plastic bags for. Plus I use it also for keep storing small items. Like I have all kinds of different kinds of buttons, and I'll have all my buttons in one bag or something like that, and store it within a drawer or something like that, so that everything's together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will disagree with Walter on using the plastic bags for storing anything else besides fabric. I use it for fabric pieces, same as he does. You label your pieces, you know, you've got to have so many pieces in quilting of A fabric and then B fabric and that. And it's very easy to, when you cut them all up, throw them in one of these bags and use a Sharpie marker on the outside of the bag to mark what it is, and then you can find it. But I don't store my little tools or things in plastic bags. I have.
No, not tools. I store my buttons. Things like small items like buttons and that don't take up a lot of space. Mm-hmm. And I can keep them all together by putting them in a plastic bag.
Okay, well, I thought you were talking about tools.
But no, not tools. I don't do tools.
I stand corrected. Fine. Because what I was going to say is what I find is definitely a must is to have a variety of baskets that come from the dollar store in different sizes. And I have a pile of these. And I use these ones particularly, this size I really like because I keep my scraps of fabric in this by color. And you can't see it, but beyond the camera are my shelves of fabrics. And they're all labeled, so I know what's in them. Sometimes they get a little overflowing, so I have to go through them and decide, do I really want to keep that size of scrap or should I clean it out? Now, before I got into this method, I was keeping all the scraps in plastic bags, and that just didn't work because the plastic bags were all over the place. They're not easy to stack up, they're slippery, and they start to bulge out at the seams kind of a thing. So, you know, you're cramming in stuff and you can't really see what you've got. In these baskets, if you fold it up neat enough, when you put them in, you can just go through like a little file and find what you're looking for or a piece that you're looking for. Mind you, if I'm looking at mine right now, I've got a lot of them that are a little in disarray, and that happens every now and then. But other sizes of baskets though, when you've got, well, what I like to do is when I'm doing embroidery, for example, I have a new system now, but I used to grab one of these baskets, fill it up with all the thread colors that I needed for that project, and that sat near my embroidery machine, and there they were. And then when I was done the project, I'd put them all back in their drawers where they belong. With that, so it works for that. But if you've got something that's got certain specialty rulers or certain equipment you're going to be using quite a bit, get one of these and just throw it in. It's a temporary holding spot for equipment and things like that. These are good for holding patterns as well. And speaking back to bags, I actually buy bags on Amazon that are the right size for holding a pattern for a quilt. Most patterns for quilts come folded in half, and I buy these bags. I put them in just like you buy them when you buy them in the store. They come in a bag. I buy a whole bunch of those, and if I print out a pattern, because today, you know, we download a lot of the patterns. After I print it out, I fold it up in half, and I have the cover page right there so I can see it through the bag, and I have a basket like this full of them, and you can alphabetize them or put them by designer or do whatever you want or type of project, but they're all in a nice neat spot. If you throw them in a drawer, you're not going to find what you want as quickly. So yeah, I buy these by the bushel. I buy baskets by the bushel basket. There's a joke in there somewhere. Anyways, haha, laugh now. Okay, fine. Laughs on cue. So, very good. Okay, so what else? You mentioned old pill bottles.
Yeah, well, I don't really use them a lot, but I use my old pill bottles to keep my, an old pill bottle to keep my old sewing machine needles that I discard in one place. So, I mean, I haven't really I know some people reuse their old sewing machine needles for different things but I haven't used my old sewing machine needles for anything else afterwards. But it's just a place to keep them, keeps bent pins and stuff like that, so I don't just throw them in the garbage type of thing.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you just start throwing that stuff in the garbage, that can be a hazard. You know, when you dump your garbage can out or something, it falls on the floor, you step on it, or you put it in a plastic garbage bag, and you're squeezing stuff into the plastic bag, you put your hand in it and stab yourself. But the other thing too is the environment. You can actually take these needles and dispose of them in, whatever your municipality has for recycling. They can be done. And somebody told me recently that if you go to your drugstore and ask them for a hazardous needle basket box that they have, you see them, they're green, they throw their syringes and things, and there's probably a lot of those around right now with us all getting COVID vaccinated. They'll give that to you. You can put your old needles in that, and when you've got it full or whatever, you take it back to them and they'll get rid of it for you. Now, I haven't actually gone in and tried this myself, but I have read about that and heard about that on different things on the internet. So, it may be true, it may not be true, but I have a feeling it probably is true. Maybe you have to pay something for the box. I don't know.
Just go downtown Oshawa and throw them in the bin.
Oh, yeah. Downtown in our city, there are boxes for disposing of needles, from people who have a drug problem, kind of a deal. So you also mentioned a hammer, which is not something people associate with a sewing room.
So if I'm making a bag, I haven't done it a lot, but I have done it on occasion. Making a bag or sewing thick pieces of fabric together, like making a jean jacket or making an overcoat or something like that, you may run into a spot where you have 4 or 5 more layers of fabric in one spot, and it's really thick. And your sewing machine may have trouble getting through it or whatever, or it's just ends up being very bulky and you don't really want it to be that bulky. You can basically take a hammer to it and hammer the crap out of it. And what it does is it loosens the fibers and squeezes them down a bit so that the seam ends up not being as bulky.
But you'd also can use a hammer for some other things, like if you've got snaps or something.
Yeah. Actually, if you need to put snaps in or something like that, you need to usually use a hammer, unless you have one of those fancy snap presses that cost an arm and a leg. But usually when you buy snaps, you can get a setting tool with that matches your snap size, and those tools have to be used in conjunction with a hammer to insert your snaps or grommets or tacks or something like that.
Now, you may think that a hammer is only for those who do garment sewing, but they're not. You can use them for quilting as well. There are some blocks that you may put together where there'll be intersecting seams, multiple intersecting seams in the very center of your block. And there's a lot of bulk there, and you can press the heck out of it with your iron, but it doesn't necessarily flatten it right out completely. Now, there are other tricks you can use to do with trimming and doing something, I forget what they call it, but it's a way of making the fabric, the seams fold around so they'll lay more flat. But you can also use a hammer on that. Just bang the crap out of the center part of your block. I would suggest putting a piece of scrap fabric or something over top of it, because your hammer could mark up your fabric. But people do that as well. I haven't really done it myself because I've never really had any that really give me that kind of problem. Not because I'm an excellent sewer and I know what I'm doing with it. It's just that
I haven't had to use it a lot because my sewing machine will go through really thick fabric. But I have had on occasion.
Okay, thanks for cutting me off.
Okay, sorry.
It's too late now. Carry on. Oh, do you like being cut off? Oh.
I was putting...
what were you going to say? Carry on.
I was putting snaps into my coat, and there was one section where the snap was not big enough for the seam, so I ended up hammering the seam so that I could get the snap to go through it.
So the hammer is a great tool for fudging.
Yeah.
Anyways, I started to say that it's not because I'm a really great sewer that I don't have bulky seams. It's just that they don't bother me. Maybe they should bother me, but they don't bother me. So the hammer's a good thing to use. Another thing that's everybody has some of these. Everybody says so. Yeah, these. I call them binder clips. I think that's what they're called. They come in various sizes. This is a small one. I have ones that are huge. And these do all kinds of things. They're not just for holding pieces of paper together, although you can use that. You can clip these onto big things of fabric as well that you're trying to keep all together in a project you're doing. You can use these to hang things because they've got these like hooks on here, or these eyelets on it, so hang on the back of a door on a shelf or something like that. There's 1,001 uses for a binder clip. I have hundreds of these. Well, mainly because I ripped them all off from the school when I left and when I retired, because I had quite a supply of them. But I use them all the time. And if you want to get really fancy, you can get colored ones as well. If you want to, you can use these to temporarily hang up a banner, a wall hanging, even a quilt. And I'm going to come to how I hang my quilts in a moment. And if you saw my last Idiot Quilter, you will have seen that in more detail. But, you can decorate these up. You can spray paint it. You can do whatever you want. Put a little washi tape on it if you want it to. But it depends on what your purpose. But I always have a supply of these on hand because I find that they are great for all kinds of things. Okay, another thing is magazine boxes. Now, you can go very expensive on a magazine box, and you know what I'm talking about. Those boxes for storing your magazines and books vertically. Dollar store usually sells them. They're cardboard, they're foldable, so you unfold them and away you go. And they're great for holding your patterns. They're great for holding any books. In combination with these clips, if you've got a bunch of stuff you printed off the internet, you can just put those together and shove them in the box like that way too. You can buy more elaborate ones. You can buy ones in metal, but they're going to cost you more money. IKEA is a good resource for buying them in bulk. They're cardboard usually there. You can buy them in plastic as well. You can even 3D print them. How do I know that? Because I've done it. So they've got a million uses as well. So you also mentioned scrap wood.
Okay, I use there's something when you're doing garment sewing, you can use something called called point press.
A point press.
Yeah, it's for when you want to do your collars and that, make a nice point or whatever. And they're just basically a piece of oak, I think. And you can get them, you can buy them online at Amazon and things like that. And they're just basically a piece of wood that's pointed at the end, right? And they can be quite expensive to buy because they're usually in conjunction with a clapper on one end and a point press on the other.
What's a clapper?
And a clapper is a piece of wood, usually oak. And what you do is...
Does it turn on your lights?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's a piece of wood, and usually oak. It's nice, smooth, and they're not terribly expensive. They're about $30 or so. But you can also use, if you have a piece of wood, you can use a piece of wood instead. It's if you're ironing your seams and steaming them, and you want to have them stay nice and flat, you just put the clapper on top of it right after you've steamed it and press onto it, and it will cause your seams to go very flat. And that's especially true in clothing, especially true if you're sewing something like jersey, which is difficult to press. And Another thing you can get that's...
Well, just before you leave that topic, something that's related to it I just thought of, because I just recently used this. When I was making some of the bags that I've been making, the instructions said press the seams open, and it was a piece that had extra fabric so that you could, if you laid it down flat to press your seams open, you'd get a crease you didn't want in it. So the recommendation was this round tool that seems to be covered in just a piece of fabric, a thick fabric, almost like a batting, and you put that into underneath your seam, and because it's round, you could press it open, but at the same time you weren't pressing the whole piece flat. I don't know if I'm explaining that very clearly or not, but I thought, well, I've got a piece of doweling, that's all it is, why don't I use that? It works. Now, I didn't even bother to cover it with a piece of fabric or anything like that. Maybe I should have. I just used the bare doweling as it was, and that works really well. Now, that's not something I need to do a lot, but for this particular bag project I was doing, it worked really well for that purpose. So, you know, another use for a piece of scrap wood, because everybody's probably got some doweling sitting around the house. And if you don't, you can buy it cheap.
Well, back to where the other thing was on the other end of this is a point press. And usually if you get the combination point press and clapper, they usually run around $50 or something, which is kind of pricey, I think.
Yeah, a little bit.
Per piece of wood, right?
Yep.
So what you can do is just get a skinny piece of wood like this or whatever. You buy it at Home Depot or whatever. And then just if you can get them at Home Depot, or you can get, if you have, or if you have a saw laying around, you can cut the end of it into a point. And what that does is that when you're pressing the corners of your collars and that, you just stick it in the corner, or the point into the corner, and it gives you a nice point. And all you do is get a little piece of wood for that.
Wood actually is good for a lot of stuff. I'm just looking around here in my sewing area, and I have a fair amount of wood sitting here. For example, you can't see it right now, but we're sitting at my cutting table. And what my cutting table really is a couple of, actually 2 collapsible tables, heavy duty ones, but collapsible tables. And we had a piece of plywood, 3/4 inch plywood. I think that's 3/4 inch, isn't it? Or an inch? It's a fairly heavy piece.
It's a 3/4 inch, I believe.
3/4 inch plywood sitting in our garage at the time that I put this together, and I covered it in canvas, just a piece of raw canvas, staple gunned it to it on the underside. It fits across these 2 tables, and it gives a much firmer and even surface, because the tables themselves were just plastic. But this actually strengthens the tables. I can actually stand up on top of this, and I have, for several reasons. So my cutting mat fits on this, and that's just a piece of plywood. But
even like this piece plywood here.
Yeah, okay, well hold that up. Here's another thing. This is my pressing mat.
It's kind of dirty right now.
Yeah, it's dirty. Well, it's got stuff on it. Yeah. It is a piece of plywood. I think this is was that 3/4 inch? No, it's a half inch.
It's about a half inch.
Half inch. Now this one I layered with, flip it the other way. I layered it with batting, and then I put a piece of this canvas, because I had a lot of this canvas, on top of it, and that's what I use as a pressing mat, as opposed to having to dig out my ironing board all the time, because the ironing board's in a different room, and I don't have a lot of space here. Plus, I put my wool mat on top of that. You're going to say, well, is that overkill? Well, yeah, maybe, but I like the surface of the wool mat. But the problem with the wool mat is, warning, never put your wool mat on top of your cutting mat, because the heat and steam go right through the wool mat. It's completely porous, and it will warp. Ask me how I know. You will warp your cutting mat. And once you've warped your cutting mat, and I have tried various techniques, you will never get it back to its original shape. So this protects, because this is actually partially sitting on my cutting mat as well, because I've got a great big huge cutting mat, a 60 incher. Even though with this under here, it acts as a barrier from the steam and the heat, so it doesn't warp my mat, my cutting mat. So yeah, wood's good for that. Also, behind me, or my shoulder, underneath the quilt I'm working on, there is my embroidery machine. Well, my embroidery machine's a little too wide for my IKEA shelves that are there. You've got this upstairs as well. So we just put a little piece of plywood underneath it, and that gives me an extended area so that, you know, everything is sitting level.
Yeah, like on my sewing machine, I've got it sitting close to the wall, and on my embroidery machine, and I have one hoop that's 14 by 11, and if I have the sewing machine sitting on even on the edge of my table, the hoop will hit the wall on it. So what I did was I put this piece of plywood underneath my embroidery machine, and what I can do is I can pull the embroidery machine out a little bit further than the table. Not enough to get it out of balance or anything like that, but I can pull it out just a little bit further than the edge of the table, and then the embroidery hoop clears the wall. So that's sort of a hack that I've got for that.
In a sense, there are shelving things you can buy that allow you to do the same thing, but it has like little rollers on them, and you can slide it out and slide it back in. Oftentimes you'll find those in the kitchen department of like Home Depot or at IKEA, things like that, because they're meant to go inside your cupboards. Yeah, you could spend money on something like that if you wanted to, but they're not cheap.
Yeah, and I just went to Home Depot and I got it's a pre-cut board, which is, I can't remember exact size of it. I think it's about 24 by 24 that my sewing machine sits on. So
24 inch by 24 inch, you mean?
Yeah, 24 inch, 2 feet by 2 feet. So.
And that's another thing. If you don't have the equipment at home to cut wood, or you don't want to because you don't want to use power tools or something like that, oftentimes when you go to a place like Home Depot or that, you buy the wood, you can get them to cut it for you.
Yeah, like you can, they sell these pre-cuts, and if that's not the right size, you can take the pre-cut or a regular sized piece and ask them to cut you off a piece or cut it into a smaller piece, and they'll do it.
They'll do it for you. So you don't have to worry about not having power tools or not wanting, if you don't want to use power tools. I mean, personally, I don't really like to do any kind of cutting with wood because I'm afraid I might lose a finger or 12. Don't have 12 fingers. Well, that means I've already lost 2. That's why, no. Yeah, so don't underestimate the power of wood because it's handy. It's very handy. Okay, so something that every household has, I am sure, because they're all the rage for cleaning and everything else, is a microcloth. Don't look at the dirt on mine. I have this sitting by my sewing machine. I use it for a lot of different things. Actually, the one thing I use it for the most is cleaning my sewing machine. Okay? And I don't just mean dusting it off on the outside. It's when I'm oiling it, I'm cleaning out all my lint, I will take a little drop of oil and put it on a corner of this, a part of this, stick my finger in there and go right into my bobbin case and clean around. And you would be surprised. That's after you've brushed out the dust bunnies. It'll come out pretty dirty, okay? And that can gum up your sewing machine too. So that's something you should get into the habit of doing when you clean your sewing machine. And you are cleaning your sewing machine, right? And you are doing that after every major project. And you're putting in a new needle, aren't you? And you're cleaning out all the fuzz bunnies, aren't you? You are doing that, aren't you? We had a whole thing about that back.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, most of your problems can be solved if you have a clean machine or you clean your machine. This is going to work. But this also works really well for doing quick dusting jobs in your sewing room because there's dust. Fabric creates dust. Now, I know some people also say you can use scrap pieces of batting, and you can. I've tried it. But you want to know something? The difference between a scrap piece of batting and a microcloth is scrap batting creates more dust. Okay? Because that's where a lot of your dust is coming from in the first place, is from when you're layering your quilts.
Yeah, I know. My machine gets really gummed up when I do a bag and I use the fluffy interfacing and stuff like that.
So, all you're really doing with a piece of of batting is just moving your dust around into a new area. A microcloth picks it up. I don't spray this with anything, like I don't spray it with end dust or anything like that, because actually, you know, stuff like end dust and pledge and that attracts dust because it's sticky. I just use the microcloth, and that's what they're designed for. So I like to have one of these handy right by my sewing machine. Use it all the time. So, and you can get microcloths at the dollar store as well. Although I'm not sure what the quality's like at the dollar store. This one, I don't think this one came from a dollar store. Probably came from Walmart. I don't know.
I think it's Canadian Tire.
Oh, it could be Canadian Tire. So I may have spent a little bit more than $1 on these, but even still, they're worth the money and they're not that expensive. So, okay. So, have you talked about, no you have not, you haven't talked about a light board, which is not something you can buy at the dollar store.
No, but I do have a light board that...
I have one too.
No, people might not know what a light board is.
Well,
here, give me,
no, I've got one here, right here. This is a light board. This one's very thin. This is actually Caterpillar Glow, and it's rechargeable, so you don't need to have it plugged in when you're using it. 3 settings. There's what it looks like. You probably can't tell on that it's on, but it is on. So go ahead, explain the principle.
I was originally, many years ago, doing stained glass, and I bought one because you kind of need to see it. It helps light up your glass to see it and that. But if you're doing sewing, when I'm doing sewing, I often print my shirt patterns out as a PDF. And when I print them out at home, they come out in 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and you have to stick all these pieces of paper together and line them up. What are you doing?
No.
And lining them up. And sometimes if you can put them on a light table or something, or not a light table, but you can put them on a light colored table, and it will help you. You can sort of see the lines through it. But if you put them on one of these light boards, or actually, what do they call them? Light tables.
Light table.
It's actually a light that you're putting them on. So then, when you put the 2 pieces of pattern together, you can see where all the lines line up, so you can line up your pattern accurately to paste them together. So then you get a nice accurate pattern, PDF pattern for your shirt that you've got, if you've got one of these boards. And they're actually really versatile for things like that.
And they're not that expensive anymore. There was a day and an age, well, the one that you have, I paid about $300 for that one that I got you back in the day. This one, I think that I just showed you, I paid under $100 for it, and now you can buy them for even less than that. And they come in various sizes and types. Now, how do you use it when you're quilting? Well, applique, because you're tracing a pattern with that. So you just put your pattern down for your applique on top of this, and you can tape it to this as well. So it doesn't move around. You put your fabric down on top of it, away you go. Or your steam-a-seam, or whatever it is that you're using. So,
or tracing a pattern is easy. Yeah. It's good for that too.
There's a lot of uses for a light board. In fact, when I bought this light board, I wasn't into sewing at that point in time. I bought it for crafting purposes, and actually I've used it more since I got into sewing than I did for the crafting purposes. But it's a really good thing to have. Now, you could use a window, okay? But
the only problem with a window's vertical.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah, and it's a pain in the butt. It's really a pain in the butt.
Now, I've heard other people using solutions like they'll take a sheet of glass, put it across the back of 2 chairs, and put a light underneath on the floor and going up. Well, that seems a lot of trouble to me to go to that. I mean, okay, maybe if you were only going to use your light board once forever, you maybe want to do a makeshift something like that, but really, I think it's a good investment.
I suppose if you had an old window hanging around or something like that, you could use that as well. But it's
well, pane of glass, like
it's a lot of the makeshift ones don't really work that well.
No.
I know the people that I do when I go to my classes that do the apparel stuff, and they all they do is complain about pasting the PDF patterns together. Like you can go to a what do you call it, a professional printer and have them printed off. But I always find that you gotta, you know, if you do that, you have to send the printer your PDF. You have to wait a few days for it to be printed, and then you have to pick it up.
And it's not particularly cheap.
It's not that cheap. And I find for a couple hours or an hour or so it takes me to stick a PDF pattern together. I just is readily able to do that way. That's why I like using the light table. But the people that don't have the light table, they're always complaining about not being able to align their pattern correctly.
But they are very inexpensive now. A few years ago, they weren't. They were something you had to buy at a specialty art store or order them online, and they would be several $100s. Like I said, it wasn't that many years ago I bought the one that I got, Walter, and that cost me almost $300 for it at the time. And now you can pick them up for under $100. You can probably pick them up now for about $50 if you look around. Yeah. It depends on what features you want. Some will be brighter than others. Like this one I showed you has 3 bright settings on it. Cricut, the company that makes the electronic die cutting machine, they have their own, the Bright Pad, and they've just come out with a new one that is sort of like this one. It's rechargeable. You don't need to have it plugged in. And you look how light they are and how thin. I mean, it's like a piece of Bristol board. They're very strong. And this particular one, I also bought some accessories. I bought a cutting mat that you can put on top of it, and I bought a glass mat as well that fits on top. And I bought that more for the purposes of crafting. But the glass mat, if you want to use your rotary cutter to cut out your applique pieces, when you're using the light mat, you could do that because that's what the glass is for. You cannot cut directly on this surface on this particular one because that would ruin it. But you know, very portable too. You're going to a retreat, going to a class, you need this, you can pack this into your sewing bag and take it with you. Okay, so let's see. Now we're not going to get through everything today. There will be a part 2 to this. So I'm just looking down here. Oh, okay. I want to talk about something that I started buying almost in bulk on Amazon because I love them. Command hooks. Okay, you know, the ones by 3M that they come in various sizes and various finishes. And if you look right over here, just open the door a little bit, Walter. And bring it towards you. Okay. See this door? All of that's command hooks. I use that as a storage space. Anything I can hang up, it goes on the back of that door. You can shut it down. Command hooks, I really like those because one, I don't have to screw nail them or hammer them into anything. It's just got sticky tape that comes with it. Away you go, pressure sensitive. However, having said that, they are very easy to take off. That's the beauty of the command hooks. They are not supposed to mark your walls. And in most cases when I've used them, I've had good luck with that. Now, yeah, sure, there's going to be certain paints on your walls. Maybe you might want to test it if you're going to take them off a lot. But they're very easy to remove and they don't mark up, for the most part, the surface that you've stuck them to. Well, you saw how I use them on the back of my door to hang things up. Well, I use them to hang up quilts, wall hangings. Now, wall hangings or quilts, if you want to hang them up, the traditional way is you make a sleeve, you sew it into the binding at the top of your quilt, you run a curtain rod through it, and you have to mount the curtain rod on the wall where you're going to hang it up. So that means, you know, you've got the things, the standard things you have for mounting curtain rods. And that's a pain in the butt. Plus, that makes permanent holes in your wall. So let's say, you know, you want to switch out your quilt or something like that, but you know, you need a smaller rod or a larger rod, so you may have to move your brackets around, which means drilling more holes or whatever into the wall. Well, if you use command hooks, and I buy curtain rings with clips on them. They're just see if I can find some here to show you. I buy these in bulk too on Amazon. This is what I'm talking about. They've got this little clip at top. So basically, it's like a clothes peg, but they're really, really strong. So they clamp on very well. So I clamp those to the top of my quilt, you know, every 6 or 8 inches, depending on the size of whatever the pieces I'm hanging up. And then using the command hooks, I just hook those over the command hooks. And the command hooks are white, the ones that I use, with a silver hook. They really don't stand out. I mean, okay, if your walls were black, you definitely would see it. But you know, if I have light colored walls, so really they blend in pretty well. And the beauty is, this is adjustable, because when I want to switch out and put a different thing up there, I just unclip them from this and clip the new one in, and I can, you know, wherever across the top, whatever spacing I need. So once I figured this out, I went on Amazon and I bought a bag of 50 of those. And I think a bag of 50 only cost me under 20 bucks for a bag of 50. Command hooks, the same. You can buy them in bulk as well on Amazon. In fact, I recommend buying them from someplace like Amazon, because if you go to Walmart or something like that, you only get packages of like 3 or something. I buy them in packages of 21 for about $16.99, I think it costs. And they come with extra sticky strips as well. So I love my command hooks. I put them on everything. Other places you can put command hooks, you can put them on the side of your sewing machine. If you want to keep your scissors handy, you can stick it to the side of your sewing machine, and there you go. Or, you know, any other tool that might have, you know, the ability to hang something from. So I can't live without my command hooks. They're great. And if you don't like using those curtain rings, hey, you know, you just go back to your binder clip as well. Not as pretty, but very usable. And behind me, the quilt that's hanging up right now, which you can't see at the top, I bought a system, again from Amazon, that's a wire. It's a wire, and it has 2 fittings, one at either end. You screw the fittings into a ceiling, or in my case, there's an open beam, so it's screw nailed up there. The wire goes across, there's a tension adjustment on it, so you can tighten it right up. And you can use these kind of things. Actually, I don't use these ones that I just showed you. I use a little different system. But basically, they are little clips. Okay, I can't get them out of my bag. I'm fighting with a plastic bag. Oh, another use for a plastic bag. Yeah, okay. Why can't I get that? There we go. Okay. The difference is, because the wire goes right across and I don't have a free end to slip this part over, I have a whole bunch of just this piece, minus the ring, and it's a little hook. And it just onto the wire. I clip my quilt on there, and it's like a curtain now. I can slide, and you've seen me do this in some of the videos. I can just slide it across. I also use this as a substitute for design wall because I don't have room. Okay, get over there. Well, you know how it works. I don't have room for a design wall. So that's why this one's hanging up, actually. It's not really to show you my outhouse quilt. I'm still working on it because I'm making this up for my own design. So I can hold pieces of fabric up or whatever, and there it is. So that takes us up to right now about 54 minutes we've been going on about parts. Let's do one more. You have one you want to talk about?
Not really.
Oh,
Do you
okay.
have one? What, the tape?
Talk about tape, yeah.
Okay,
you use
so yeah, everybody uses tape. I use tape to put my PDF patterns together. I have been using masking tape for my current sewing project, which is a jean jacket, and in that pattern I have to do 5/8 inch seams, and the markings are on the top of my sewing machine to guide me as to where my 5/8 inch mark is for the sewing, but it's away from the edge of the foot. So what I have done is I've taken a piece of masking tape and just put it across that 5/8 inch mark so that I have a really visual guide as to where the edge of the 5/8 inch point is when I'm doing sewing a seam.
So you put your fabric up against that edge of that tape.
The other seam that I use a lot is 3/8 inch. But I don't bother with the masking tape because the edge of my foot that I'm using, the needle position in the middle to the edge of the foot is 3/8 inch. So I don't have to worry about that. But with the 5/8 inch seam, it's further away than the foot, and it's not as easy to figure out when you're sewing it from using the markings on the machine. So I just put that in as a guide for that. That's the first I've been using that for that. But I've used masking tape for other things too, like if I want to do the figure out what the right side and the wrong side of my fabric is, I take a little piece of masking tape off, put right side or wrong side on it, slap it onto the back of my fabric or the front of my fabric or whatever, so it reminds me which side is the right side.
Now, do you ever have any problem with the sticky on your masking tape getting off on your fabric? No, because I could see that being a problem. However, there's a way around that. You could use painter's tape, which is low tack.
Actually, that's what I was talking about. It's painter's tape.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a difference.
I didn't know.
Masking tape and painter's tape. Well, it is a form of masking tape, but it's low tack.
Oh, okay.
Painter's tape. Actually, Walter's talking about marking on his sewing machine, you know, the 3/8 of an inch or whatever. Well, I've never done this myself because I have a 1/4 inch foot with a guide on it. But if you don't have one and you need to do 1/4 inch seam allowances, then you can basically make your own guide by taking multiple layers of masking tape and laying them down. Measure out from the center of your needle that 1/4 inch spot, put the edge of the tape so that the left edge of the tape is right where the 1/4 inch seam would be, and build it up. Build it up with 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of tape so you have a little ledge, and then you can just butt your fabric up against it and you can do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, the only disadvantage of that is that over time your tape will dry out, or it can. It depends on the brand you use. And so you may have to keep reusing it. Personally, I would invest in a 1/4 inch foot with an edge guide on it because I just think that's easier. Plus, you're getting sticky on your little table, and over time that's going to collect like dirt and things.
I've only used it recently for this 5/8 inch mark because up until then I haven't really had to use it. But having the masking tape does help for a variety of things. Even just, you know, putting it on a bottle or something and marking.
Well, for labeling.
Labeling and stuff for a quick label if you don't have a label maker.
In the next part of this, we will talk about label making, and I can't live without my label maker. But just before we go, and just to finish up, we're talking about the masking tape. Another thing that the masking tapes are good for is when you're doing in machine or machine embroidery, because sometimes you have to hold down your fabric. And so now you can buy specialized embroidery masking tape at your quilt store. It's very expensive. They like to claim that it's reusable. It is not. It is not as sticky as masking tape, I find. Now, there are people who would argue with me and go, they use it all the time, have no problems with it. I find just ordinary, everyday masking tape that you buy at the dollar store works for me if I need to do that. I try to avoid having to do that, but there are sometimes you can't avoid it. You need to do it for certain applications. But it's good to have. It's good to have masking tape handy, and Scotch tape and painter's tape. I have a variety of tapes sitting in my sewing room for a variety of different uses. So it is something I think that, you know, it's not something you think about when you first get into sewing, either quilting or garment making, because, well, wait, I'm sewing. Masking tape is for holding things together. I wouldn't be hemming my pants with masking tape, would I? Oh, or would you? Well, I'll leave you with that note. Okay, so we got through about a good number of them, but we have more. The list is growing. So this is part 1. Next week we will carry on with our discussion of hacks and unexpected tools for your sewing room, and probably finish up our list then. In the meantime, if you've got some suggestions for things that you have used in your sewing room that you can't live without or that you think other people should know about, drop them into the comments below, and we'll take a look at those and bring those up in the next show. So hope you have a good week. Go be creative, and we'll see you next week for another episode of So Chatty. Oh, just before we leave, I almost forgot. If you look in the show notes below, you will find a link, of course, to Craft and Chat coming up next week. And you will find the Zoom link for Stephen's Creative Birthday Bash on July the 10th, where we're just going to spend the day working on whatever creative things we want to work on and talking about this or about that, whatever, very informal.
Those are all Zooms, right?
Those are both Zooms. And there's also a link to my latest Idiot Quilter, and there are links to a bunch of our favorite supply places. There's some quilting stores. These are all online. There's some general supply things and garment fabric stores that Walter likes and that I like. So we thought we'd put those in as permanent links in our show notes, because these are sites we go to all the time and have had really good luck and service with them. So you might want to check those out. Okay, that's enough. So we'll see you next week. Have a good one. Say goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye, Walter.